My class at Harvard Business School preceded the GMAT. So admission was based on an interview with a dean. He was testing some kind of psychological property in me because there was a pencil in the corner of his desk, and he pushed it off. I leaned over, put it back on the corner. He pushed it off again. I leaned over, put it back on the desk. The third time he pushed it off, I just left it on the floor. What that proved to him, I still don't know. But he said in the course of the interview, he said, "Here, we teach you to think." And I thought to myself, though fortunately I didn't say it, what arrogance. But he was right. They were teaching a kind of thinking that I didn't know anything about. I could see, especially in the first year, that there were guys in my section who were much better at doing what Harvard Business School valued than I was, a lot better, and that I had a lot of ground to make up. When I graduated from Harvard, 3 of my professors asked me to stay on and write cases for them. And I chose Bob Anthony. And he was a fine mentor. He was very patient with me, forgiving with my mistakes, and just a fine boss. And I took the job with the understanding that I would only work for him for a year, and then I would go on. And at the end of the year, he and I both thought that the now bankrupt and defunct Arthur D. Little would be a good place for me. My recollection is that at the time Fisher came to Arthur D. Little in 1965, there were about 60-odd professionals in that operations research group. I think it's fair to say that really none of them, including my boss, were interested in my work. Well, hey, they had a lot of other things to be interested in. But Fisher, for some reason, took an interest. I guess he came around and introduced himself, and he took an interest, and well, you know, the word quant is really a word with 2 different meanings. One is people who are only interested in numbers and really don't care very much about going beyond numbers into the real world. And the other is people who care about finding better quantitative ways of structuring the real world, ways that fit better, that are more realistic, and so on. And Fisher was the second kind of quant. My folks had a little place in the mountains above Denver where they would retreat from the heat of the Iowa summer. And because I was still a bachelor, I would go out there every summer and spend my annual vacation with them. And in 1958, I went down to the University of Denver library and read Modigliani and Miller's 1958 paper arguing that basically changing, aside from tax considerations, changing the degree of levering in a company's capital structure will not change the value of the company. So in effect, it won't change the cost of capital. What tipped me off to this wonderful M&M paper, and I just don't know now, but boy, it was inspiring. Arthur D. Little had hired a PhD economist from Chicago for the operations research group. And without my knowing it, he sent the early paper to Merton Miller. Franco was just leaving Northwestern for MIT. Sometime after he got to MIT, Franco called me up at Arthur Little and invited me to lunch. And he said, I've read your paper. Frankly, you need to come to MIT and study economics.
Typical Franco.
So, I didn't even ask my boss for permission. I didn't even say, hey, would it be okay if I took a year off? And, wouldn't that be in your interest? No, I just went. Franco Modigliani just did me a huge favor by saying, look, Traynor, break this thing up into 2 pieces. And he called the first piece Toward a Theory of the Market Value of Risky Assets. To me, it's still funny because it's so, has a wonderful social science flavor about it. That, Traynor would never, I don't know what I would have called it, but not that. The first paper, I was trying to introduce what I then thought was a new concept of performance. The performance was not rate of return. Performance was rate of return with the market effect subtracted. Use a regression to regress return on the fund in question against return on the appropriate market index to find out what the slope of that line, that regression line, is. When I finished that year with MIT, went back to Arthur Little. Boss called me in on the first day I was back. And he said, does any of this stuff that you've been doing have any commercial value at all? And I said, boss, let me think about that for a couple of days, and I'll come back to you with a list. And I came back to him with a list. And Martin Ernst went down that list, and he stopped at performance measurement. And he said, here, performance measurement. You show me that you can do something useful with performance measurement. And so I said, okay. And I came back a couple of days later with an approach, which, of course, became the first Harvard Business Review article. Now, the second piece, the birth of the second piece was a critic said, what you've done in this first piece is no good because funds will be trying to outguess the market. And in doing so, they'll be constantly changing their beta. So you won't be able to get a meaningful measure when you start looking at the statistics of the fund. And my reaction to that, of course, was, well, if they can successfully outguess the market, then when the market return is high, they'll have a large beta. And when the market return is low or negative, they'll have a low beta. And that means that the line, instead of being straight, will be curved. And so what we need to do is measure the curvature of the line. I think we looked at 40-odd mutual funds, and only one showed any talent at outguessing the market. When Warren Buffett buys my stock, which reflects, at a price that reflects the fact that I don't have any control over the company in question. And then he goes around and buys your stock, and stock of everybody else in the room here, and puts together an aggregation that's large enough to control the company. He has something more valuable than I had. And my casual observation is that when control is sold, it's worth about 40% more than the company was worth to little investors like me. Almost every day in the financial pages of the newspapers, we read these admittedly liberal reporters' complaints about what the top executives of the big companies are getting, and the complaint always is that, you know, that they couldn't possibly, their services to the company couldn't possibly be worth that much. And of course, these reporters are steadfastly missing the point that that's, although they get in a lot of different forms, including salary and pensions and so on, this is not salary. This is not payment for what their services to the company. This is payment for the value of control. And this is being overlooked all the time. There's a limit to how much diversification you can achieve going across stocks or even across countries. As you know, there's more diversifiable risk in the global portfolio than there is in the U.S. portfolio. We ought to be taking advantage of it. A part of this whole problem, it seems to me, is, yes, we all know, thanks to Fama French and others, that there's not just one market factor. I identify that with the market model. The market model, it seems to me, is an old-fashioned way of looking at the stock market that says there's one systematic factor and then everything else is diversifiable risk. Each year's investment surprise in the market is almost uncorrelated with each other year's investment surprise. Francis Galton had discovered that when he polled the bids of primitive farmers at a country fair in England, that the average of their guesses as to the weight of a steer before it was actually weighed would come within 1% of the true value. And this is a principle for an active investor. If you think you can outsmart the market price, can you document a systematic bias in the population of investment opinion? Can you satisfy yourself that it's not just millions of independent judgments about value that are reflected in the price? I was a junior in high school, and I found that I couldn't prove many of the formulas in the physics book. Didn't have calculus, and none of my math teachers had calculus. It's hard to believe now, because they teach calculus in high school now, routinely. So I invented a kind of a crude, finite time kind of calculus. I think I've probably worked harder than my average classmate. There were about 250 in my class. There was an application to Harvard. Harvard offered me a scholarship. The feeling on my parents' part, I guess, was that Haverford would be a better experience for me, and I think they're probably right about that. I majored in math, and the stuff they taught was really not what I would have chosen to teach me. No probability, no statistics. I got to Harvard Business School, and I didn't get that stuff there either. I mean, now, later, they had Rafa and Schlafer. They taught some wonderful statistics stuff, but then, no. So one day I went back after I graduated and went up to Baker Library, found a book on probability, and taught myself.